Kumasagi Part 1 Destin by Leslee Sheu Prologue. Years of frustration had transformed Nayat into a brooding, cold man. In public, it was rare to witness even a squint of emotion on his face. In private, if he was alone, he sometimes let slip a squint or two. The love of his life was in childbirth, and the child was not his. Nayat stayed away, retreating into the solitude of his quarters. He sweated and paced as any father would. He grimaced and cursed as a father would not. He was not connected with the child, of course. His hands burned red from wringing out his concern for her. A second pregnancy was dangerous for any woman. Nayat's own mother had died because she bore a second child. Nayat came to a wall and stopped pacing. He could have felt Asta from where he stood if he didn't respect her wish for some physical and mental distance between them. He didn't respect that wish, actually, but he respected her. He loved her. Nayat rested his forehead against the wall as terror roared across his nerves. He had secretly observed her 2 days before, and her pale, wan appearance had frightened him. Nayat moved to a window facing the direction of Asta and peered out into nothing. The temple complex lay dark and quiet under the poor light of the stars. He continued to stand there until he became agitated beyond the point of obedience. He was perfectly within his rights to monitor her well-being. Suddenly resolute, Nayat seated himself in preparation to reach out to her. He straightened his spine, calmed his breathing, cleared his thoughts, and then immediately sensed someone approach the entrance to his quarters. He stood up again, listening. Seconds later, the bell chimed at the door, augmented by a hesitant knock. Nayat had sent his attendants away, so there was no one to answer for him. He stumbled slightly as he walked through the front room, and his fingers slipped at the locks. He knew who stood on the other side. For the second time in his life, Nayat opened his door to his midwife's son. While the boy stood doubled over, catching his breath, Nayat had time to slip on a mask of outward composure. Had she died? No. He would have felt it. He was sure. But why would the midwife's son rush all the way to tell him that the child had been born? Nayat found himself flushed with annoyance. "Mathan!" Nayat said in a great booming voice, causing the boy to snap to attention, chest still heaving. "Kumasagi," Mathan gasped, flashing his hand in a quick mudra of respect. "Come with me." Incomprehension prevented Nayat from moving. "To the birthing house." "Yes, please hurry." "Your Amma, no. It's Gamposati. She's asking for you. Amma said it's all right." "Asta." Naja lost his focus on the boy's face. He did not expect a summons from her, even with all the reasons, some hoped for and some dreaded, that she might have. And why did she ask for him via Mathan, when she could have just... "Sat, please." Mathan regained Nayat's attention. "You should hurry. She isn't well." Such news caused all caution to evaporate. Of course she wasn't well. Najat leapt past the boy, sprinted across the foyer, and thudded down the switchback stairs before he remembered that a hint of composure might be necessary. He didn't know Mathan was following close behind, and the boy had to pull several maneuvers to avoid running into Najat's backside as the man halted at the bottom of the stairs. Mathan skirted past him and led the way outside, pointing down the Lampit Lane in the direction that he had come. "Past Medical Arts, turn right. It's in the annex across the lane. Someone will be waiting." Najat already knew the location. He stripped off his robes and threw them to the boy, then ran in a dignified manner toward the lane in his loincloth. The lane was a slim canal that connected most parts of the temple complex. Flat stones paved each side of the water for those he preferred to walk. For the Kumasagi, swimming was faster. Without slowing down at the edge, Najat executed a neat side dive into the lane and took off with smooth, powerful strokes toward the Medical Arts building. The night-cooled water did not provide comfort. Najat berated himself for staying so far from her. It was a fair distance to the Medical Arts building. The boy could run faster than swim, but still, it must have taken precious time to reach Najat's quarters. Najat kicked harder, trying to redeem time, trying to redeem everything. His webbed hands sheared huge arcs through the water. He cut under one footbridge, then a second, as the north face of the temple loomed on his left too slowly. Then, finally, the greenery that fringed the halls of the Medical Arts building began flashing by on his right. another footbridge. The Kumasagi was known for his remarkable aquatic speed, but tonight it felt like he was crawling through sand. Lamplight illuminated an intersection in the lane. Najat struggled to clear his mind as he took a right turn with a smooth side stroke. An archway rose up ahead of him, part of an elevated walk that connected the medical arts building to its satellites. In the expanded lamplight under the arch, an attendant leaned out over the water, watching for him. Najat slowed his stroke to convey an appearance of calm. No one knew of his feelings for Asta. Any display of emotion must be kept in the acceptable realm of a man's concern for his brother's wife. The attendant, one of Mayor's, stepped back as Najat pulled himself out of the water. "Kumasagi," she said, as his shadow fell across her face. Her mudra was hampered by the clean robes that she held in her arms. The towering figure and stern demeanor of Najat Gampoban had the unintended effect of intimidating those who saw him for the first time. Even standing there in his loincloth, shaking excess water from his long limbs, he exuded a certain dignity unsurpassed by other men. Without waiting for directions from the attendant, Najat opened his mind and located Asta within the walls of the building. The attendant found herself trotting after him as he headed for the nearest entrance. "Oh, Sat!" She had to tug at his arm to get his attention. Najat grunted at the reminder, taking the robes from her and pulling them on as he continued into the building. It would not do for the Kumasagi to arrive in the Mayor's domain wearing only his underwear. Using Asta's waning energy as a beacon, he chose the correct corridor and hastened to the room that he felt her in. Mayor herself met him at the door. The midwife bowed and lifted her hands in the mudra of respect as he entered the damp chamber. Each of the attendants in the room briefly stopped her work to face him and echo the midwife's gesture. "Come." Mayor gestured for him to follow her around the edges of the circular birthing pool. The strange pink tint of the water caught Najat's attention, and as they neared the opposite side, he saw a wet trail leading from the tiled edge of the pool, a trail that graduated from diluted pink to viscous red as it met the feet of the low couch where Asta lay. They had to step over the trail to reach Asta's side. Two women who had been hovering over the bed moved back as Najat approached. Even Mayor's remained a few feet behind as he knelt at Asta's shoulder. Asta's eyes met his with unexpected clarity. Najat recognized the brightness in those eyes, and his heart jumped. Asta was dying. Every muscle and nerve in his body strained to keep his face relaxed and his demeanor calm. He wanted to scream at the sight of her hardened, cracked skin, the fluid at her nose and mouth, her paralyzed limbs. Many others had died beneath his hand, yet he could not bear watching it happen to her. He permitted himself a gentle touch to her brow, but then his hand trembled so tellingly that he had to withdraw it. Najat broke contact with those shining gray eyes and abruptly stood, disregarding a meek sound of protest from Asta. He turned to look at Mayor. The plump, usually cheerful midwife shook her head, moving in to adjust the blanket that covered Asta's lower half. "We tried," she said, indicating a dark patch of blood that saturated most of the fabric. The patch was still spreading. Hearing Najat's intake of breath, Mayor cut him off. "We tried. We sent for a doctor, but she put him to sleep before he could get here. She won't let anyone help. She won't even let Amala Tebe come." Mayor lowered her voice. "Talk to her. She asked for you." I think she wants you to." Najat rumbled, to indicate he understood, yet had Astra really given up? Why wouldn't she accept those who might save her? He couldn't save her. He could only guide her at a time of death. She was certainly dying. He could feel that excruciatingly well from where he stood. Instinct took over. All feelings shoved aside. In front of Mayor, Najat must behave as if he had no other reason to be here. He knelt beside Asta again. This time, her searching eyes did not meet his directly. He knew that he couldn't talk to her as the midwife had suggested, because Asta's senses were now dissolving, one by one. She could no longer hear him. Her sight was failing, and she could not taste or smell. By this time, her body would be numb, unable to feel his reassuring touch at her arm. As a Mahasagi, Najat was intimately familiar with each stage of the dying process. He prepared to do for Asta what he had done for so many others. He would assist her consciousness as it transferred from her body to make sure that she was in a state of peace. The Mahasagi were there to purify the mind and spirit as the body died. Najat Gampoban was a disciplined master of his craft, no matter that he had become a troubled soul. He was capable of shielding his own dark corners from the increased clairvoyance of the dying. Only those who had passed on knew of the warm, clear light that resided on the other side of the Mahasagi's being. Now, with eyes and knees on the wet tile, Najat tucked his own pain away and put his heart into summoning the light for his beloved Asta. As Najat gingerly opened the line to her, preparing to merge his awareness with hers, he sensed that this was not the only reason that she had summoned him to her deathbed. Her bloodless lips could no longer speak, but she had something to tell him. He felt her waiting for him. A sudden intuitive urge caused him to hesitate. "Wait," he whispered, even as he felt himself sliding into the trance that was not his own. Asta's process of dying had accelerated, and it was pulling him in. Mayor stood a few paces from the bed, skeptically checking Najat's technique. His posture towards Asta had such a tenderness to it that Mayor chided herself. After all, Najat Gampoban had done this countless times. Deciding that he must have things under control, the midwife finally stepped back to let the Mahasagi do his work. A flash of color caught the corner of Mayor's eye. She turned to see her son standing in the doorway with the weighted mass of Najat's traditional blue robes slung over one shoulder. The boy watched the scene across the birthing pool, mesmerized. As a mother determined to shield her child from the reality of death, Mayor leapt around the pool to plant her girth between Mathan and his view of the room. "Thank you, dear. Thank you." She patted his flushed cheeks and took the cloth he carried for Najat. Mathan tried to sneak another peek around his mother's wide hips, but she flicked open the robes, deftly blocking her son's view as she shook wrinkles from the heavy fabric. She used the wide cloth to shepherd Mathan into the corridor. "Now, it's getting late, but how is she?" Mathan looked up at Mayor. His beautifully concerned eyes put a lump in the midwife's throat. The boy had planted himself directly outside from the moment he found out that Asta was in labor. Asta had befriended him some years before, and Mayor suspected that lately her son experienced the stirring of his first innocent crush. It was too difficult to tell him the truth. "We won't really know until the morning," she lied. "It's a good thing that you brought the Mahasagi. He can help her." Mayor had sent the boy on an errand just to give him something meaningful to do. Now she propelled him away from the birthing room with a stern hand on his shoulder. "Go back to the house. Get some sleep, Kumala." Mathan yawned hugely at the suggestion. "Get some sleep," she repeated. "I'll see you in the morning." To prevent further argument, she closed the door behind her. Her son's question was a reminder. There was a baby to tend to. After carefully hanging Najat's clothes on the wall hook near the door, Mayor stole around the opposite side of the pool, glancing at the couch on her way. The brittled form of Asta lay immobile on the wet cushions as a lithe form of the Mahasagi knelt, unmoving, beside her. Creased efforts on Asta's face represented a struggle. No woman could go peacefully knowing that she must leave behind a newborn. Mayor's eldest attendant waited in the far corner of the humid room, holding the cleaned and swaddled baby. The midwife approached, swallowing hard against the tragic scene. The attendant was weeping. "Shush, shush," Mayor chided the woman, taking the child from her. The baby was content with open, calm eyes. Swaddled as he was, he looked healthy and well-formed. Each tiny hand displayed 5 tiny, webbed fingers, all properly developed. He was a good weight and length. His facial features were as well proportioned as an infant's features could be. Mayor marveled as the child cooed at her. Mayor's attendants wiped the tears away and put on a more professional face. Mayor was gratified. They had to plan what to do with the child, and she needed her women to have their wits about them. She was about to give instructions to her attendants when the woman suddenly jumped and let out a teeny gasp. Staring past Mayor's shoulder, the midwife turned around to see what had startled her attendant and almost dropped the child. Najat Kempopan stood behind them. The midwife reflexively clutched the baby more securely to her chest. There was a strange look in Najat's brown eyes as he stared toward some vague area between Mayor's face and the bundle in her arms. She wasn't sure if she should speak to him. He seemed to still be in a trance. He took a step closer, prompting her to blurt out, "Kumasagi." Najat finally spoke. "The child." "Kumasagi," the midwife repeated, trying to gain his attention. Why had he left Asta aside? Had Gampasati passed on? Najat continued to walk toward the confused Mayor. Candlelight caught a sheen of perspiration across the dark bronze dome of his shaved head. Suddenly, Najat's eyes snapped to catch Mayor's. "Asta must see the child. She must see the child before she goes." He spoke clearly, his deep voice commanding. Apparently, Asta was still alive. "But the baby is... There was a reason that Mayor had not already shown the child to his mother. "Look," she told Najat, lifting the cloth that covered the newborn's lower half. She cocked her arm to show the Kumasagi what she had trouble articulating. One massive hand closed firmly around the midwife's upper arm. Najat pulled her forward to get a closer look at the child. Normally fearless, Mayor gulped as the towering Kumasagi's breath fanned her forehead. Her nearest attendant scurried backwards into the shadows. Najat ignored their reaction to this peculiar behavior as he inspected the naked child. The baby's dark legs, so similar in color to Najat's own skin, kicked in healthy reaction to the sudden draft where Mayor held the cloth away. Najat grunted, and his grip on Mayor's arm tightened. His face darkened as the reason for her concern became clear. Finally, he released her arm and straightened his spine, holding her eyes with his. "She must see him, regardless. Cover his parts." Najat stepped aside and motioned for Mayor to precede him toward the couch where Asta lay. His iron stare crushed any chance of rebellion. Tucking the swaddled cloth securely around the baby's legs and abdomen, the midwife obeyed. The blanched form of Asta appeared as a corpse. Her stiff hands lay red on the blood-soaked blanket. Her cold arms lay white against the dark, wet cushions. Asta's eyes were open to the ceiling. But Mayor knew that the woman could not see. The young mother was already dead. "No," Najat rumbled. "She is still there." He clutched Mayor's bruised arm again, dragging her the last few steps to Asta. The midwife's bolder attendants flinched at Najat's rough handling of their mistress. Mayor saw their protective stance and shook his head at them, willing them to step back. The young women submitted, but their watchful eyes remained to comfort her. Prodded by the Kumasagi, the midwife leaned toward Asta's body. It was awkward, trying to show the child to an unresponsive, prone figure. Mayor tilted the bundle as well as she could without spilling the baby onto the mother's frigid chest. "Here." Najat's voice sounded impatient in her ear. He touched Mayor's arm again, but this time a gentle warmth spread from his fingers. Alarmed, the midwife felt the muscles across her shoulders and chest relax. Her arms went limp under the weight of the child. The Kumasagi reached in and pulled the bundle from Mayor's weakened grip. "Stay back," he said to Mayor's angry attendant. The midwife watched helplessly as Najat knelt beside Asta again, placing soft fingers on a seemingly deceased woman's brow. His other long arm cradled the whimpering baby, who began to fuss and kick. "Shh." He shot at the women around him. No one moved. Bowing his head, he slid back into his silent dialogue with Asta. After a few moments, even the newborn fell quiet. Mayor's strength returned, but she felt a strange fog settling in her head. She stepped closer to the couch, trying to understand what was happening. Suddenly, amazingly, Asta's body moved. One hand slid in the blood at her hip as her shoulders began to tremble. Her saliva-encrusted mouth cracked open. Asta let out a loud and raspy moan, freezing the hearts of the women surrounding her. Najat pulled away and stood up, towering over the women again. "A sister! She wants to sit up." Incredulous, the women hesitated. Finally, Mayor herself hurried forward when Asta's whole body had begun to convulse. The Kumasagi stepped back and enveloped the newborn securely with both arms as Mayor's attendants muscled past him to help their mistress. Asta's eyes came alive again, rolling breathing madly as she raggedly gasped for air. The women struggled to get their arms under her slippery, heaving shoulders. "Support her head," Mayor directed them. Slowly, they lifted Asta's dripping torso from the soggy couch. "Cover her back." Asta was halfway sitting now, trembling at the verge of consciousness as the women supported her back with strong arms and dry blankets. Mayor struggled to hold down Asta's twitching arms. It would still be difficult to show her the baby this way. Asta's head lolled forward. Mayor lifted one arm to shove Asta's head back up by the chin and hold it in place. "Asta! Asta!" Mayor tried to get her attention. Beneath clinging strands of white, wet hair, Asta's eyelids fluttered. Finally, with a certain amount of steadiness, her eyes fell open on Mayor. "Kumasagi," Mayor summoned Najat to bring the baby. She kept her eyes on Asta's face, willing the woman to stay focused. Asta's lips quivered blue against Mayor's thumb. She was trying to speak. Her breath fell on Mayor with a heavy smell. The women all leaned in, trying to grasp her words. Asta had nothing to say. Her eyes rolled back. She convulsed again, a test of muscle power for the women supporting her. "Kumasagi," said Mayor, as Asta stopped moving and sagged in the women's straining arms. Najat did not step forward. Mayor looked up and saw only her dazed attendants. The candle-dim chamber beyond was empty. Najat Gampoban had vanished, along with Asta's newborn child.